The journey was from August 27th to September 26, 2018. 31 days on the road. I rode over 6,000 miles from Florida to Newfoundland and back, traveled through 2 countries, and had the motorcycle on the auto train. I went back to my beginnings and rode through Brooklyn, New York. I took 7 ferries, 2 of which were overnight, and I went through 4 Canadian provinces and about 14 US states. Lots of roads were traveled through cities, towns, villages, and a wide array of landscapes. I connected with many interesting people and heard their cool stories. A full range of weather, road conditions, and accompanying emotions were experienced. It was a rich, wonderful experience. During my 50 days on the road traveling across the country, I endeavored to explore who I am and who I was becoming. It was now time for the newfound man to go back to the beginning. This trip would be a continuing journey to reflect on my life, the newfound human being I am, and what it meant to connect with the best version of myself. Traveling to Brooklyn, where I was born and grew up, the beginning, and then on to Atlantic Canada, the Maritimes and Newfoundland, the edge of North America. It would be an overland motorcycle journey to my beginnings and then onward. I would ride from Florida to Brooklyn by motorcycle, arriving in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, where it all started, where I was born. I wanted to explore where I grew up, noting how the places have changed, how I had changed, and how certain things were the same. I would then go north to Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and on to Newfoundland before making my way back home. It was time to take my newfound perspective for a ride. I believed this journey would be an opportunity to reflect on my life so far. Traveling through the places where I grew up, I expected would trigger many memories and would also serve as a reminder of how much things have changed, as well as how much I have changed and experienced during my life. The impermanence of it all and the gratitude for all that has come and gone was how I felt. Yet my thoughts sometimes wandered too far into the future. I thought about what my purpose in life was and how much time was left. I realize this is a human condition, and I'm sure everyone struggles with those same thoughts. At any age, the poignant reality of life is ever present. The 50 of 50 journey was a new reality that I experienced. During that time, the feelings of joy and gratitude found their way into the foreground of my being. The effort back at home had all the trappings of convention, conformity, and routine. So much time was trapped in the noise of cable news, the reality of the world, and the anxiety of the future. The noise can erode one's hope, and I truly feel that hope is the heartbeat of life. As expected, there was a lot more effort required to keep my head above the noise and in that field of joy and gratitude. This was a huge reason why this journey was so important for me to take. I needed to recharge my newfound perspective and continue the momentum that I created on the 50 of 50 journey. I've called the previous trip an endeavor of the soul, and that remains true for this upcoming journey. I'm convinced that these journeys are a way to exercise my soul, to enrich my spirit, and to strengthen my being as I travel the path in this incarnation. I was hopeful that traveling to my beginnings in Brooklyn and onward to Newfoundland would be a journey full of gratitude and adventure. While I was looking forward to reflecting on my life and recapturing the feelings of joy I experienced during my 50 days, I was most excited about the unknown and newness of the experience that awaited me. The wanderlust I was feeling was the call to exercise my soul, and the dreams of what awaited me fueled my desire to go. I thought about the freedom I felt on the road and to be in the moment. The quote by Milan Kundera captures that feeling. Quote, "What could I say? Maybe this. The man hunched over his motorcycle can focus only on the present instant of his flight. He is caught in a fragment of time, cut off from both the past and the future. He is wrenched from the continuity of time. He is outside of time. In other words, he is in a state of ecstasy. In that state, he is unaware of his age, his wife, his children, his worries, and so he has no fear, because the source of fear is in the future. And a person freed of the future has nothing to fear." Milan Kundera. The idea of another journey excited me, but there was also a bit of hesitation and a sense of anxiety about leaving home again. I reflected on the fact that life was to be lived and experienced. I knew that going meant no regrets, and I'd look back and say, wow, what a ride. Quote, Life should not be a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty, well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside in a cloud of smoke, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride." Hunter S. Thompson. Here's an excerpt from a Jack Kerouac letter. I have lots of things to teach you now, in case we ever meet, concerning the message that was transmitted to me under a pine tree in North Carolina on a cold winter moonlit night. It's said that nothing ever happened, so don't worry. It's all like a dream. Everything is ecstasy inside. We just don't know it because of our thinking minds. But in our true blissful essence of mind is known that everything is all right forever and forever and forever. Close your eyes, let your hands and nerve endings drop. Stop breathing for 3 seconds. Listen to the silence inside the illusion of the world, and you will remember the lesson you forgot, which was taught in immense milky ways of cloudy innumerable worlds long ago and not even at all. It is all one vast awakened thing. I call it the golden eternity. It's perfect. We were never really born. We will never really die. It has nothing to do with the imaginary idea of a personal self, other selves, many selves everywhere, or one universal self. Self is only an idea, a mortal idea. That which passes through everything is one thing. It is a dream already ended. I know this from staring at mountains months on end. They never show any expression. They are like empty space. Do you think the emptiness of space will ever crumble away? Mountains will crumble, but the emptiness of space, which is the one universal essence of mind, the one vast awakening, empty and awake, will never crumble away because it was never born. The world you see is just a movie in your mind. Jack Kerouac. Don't worry, it's all a dream anyway. Live life to the fullest and know that everything will be all right. This is the mantra I told myself. I knew I would be better off for having experienced whatever lied in front of me on this upcoming journey. I was determined to stop analyzing and let the dreams become a reality. I was anticipating those blissful, beatific moments to come. The past is a funny thing. Places change, people move on, and memories fade. Our recollections are a string of moments, and we try to fill in the blanks. In the end, you're left more with a feeling or an idea of what was, with the recollection of discrete moments. You can't hold on to time, but maybe you can take comfort in the journey and the experiences you've had along the way. My expectation heading back to Brooklyn and revisiting the places of my youth was that it would be an opportunity to provide context and comfort to me for a life well lived. Physically going to the places clearly wasn't necessary to reflect on how far I've come on this journey of life. However, as I was writing this, days before arriving, I wondered what I would feel. Possibly I would feel sadness for all the change, for people that had come and gone, for family that had passed on, or a general sense of loss for those bygone days. Would regrets enter my thoughts? Would I simply reminisce and reimagine things, painting a more colorful and grander picture of what was? Possibly nostalgic reflections would lead to feelings of contentment and gratitude for having moved through that time and space. After all, we are shaped by our past experiences. Yet at the same time, we strive not to allow our past to have a hold on us. No regrets. I think it's important to let go of your past, not hold on to it, but accept your personal history. Maybe that's the thing, another life lesson. What I did know was that I was excited to see all that had changed and to feel the emotions that would be triggered by being there. Well, the next journey began. It was a new journey that marked a point in time, signifying what was before and what would come next. As I mentioned before, I embarked on the 50-50 journey. It was important to punctuate life with new experiences and adventure. I was very excited to kick off this new experience, and I knew in a few days I'd hit a groove, a rhythm, where I would be in the flow. I would like to say that I carried the 50 at 50 bliss into my day-to-day life when I returned home. Of course, that experience changed me in ways I was still figuring out. It was an incredible adventure, and it was an enriching experience. It had a tremendous positive impact on who I am, and it truly enriched my soul. However, there was a contrast between being on the journey and being back home. When I was on the 50 at 50 journey, it was like catching this incredible wave. The feeling was exhilarating. I was in the moment. I wanted to ride it as far as it would take me, and I was hoping it would last forever. Maybe I thought that the 50 at 50 journey would immunize me from being pulled into the muck and noise of conventional day-to-day life. I think the lesson that was affirmed for me is that enlightenment is not a state you achieve, but a practice that must be nourished. I was less interested in finding an answer. I was more interested in just creating the awareness and acceptance of the whole messy thing called life. This first day on the road was a good day. I rode a little over 200 miles from Boca Raton to Sanford, Florida, outside of Orlando, to catch the auto train to Lorton, Virginia. It was an overnight train that would save me about 800 miles of straight I-95 north riding through the rain and heat, both of which I had experienced this day. I was the only motorcycle today on the auto train, which they had announced. It was a cool experience and something new to have the bike on the train. It also gave me time to ease into this adventure, both mentally and physically. Late August in the southeast didn't make for the most comfortable riding. I was happy to be making my way north a bit faster. A couple more days and the trip would bring me back to my beginning in Brooklyn. I was looking forward to moving through that experience and the range of emotions that I was sure would surface. So with a cold, hoppy IPA in hand and a smile on my face, I enjoyed my evening on the train. Tomorrow I would ride through Washington, D.C. and head to the Jersey Shore. I had missed being on the bike and being on the road. Jeanette was going to meet me in Halifax, Nova Scotia next week, and that would mark a new adventure. For now, the adventure continued, and I was already feeling lighter, or was it the beer? I woke up pretty early today, around 5 a.m. The train was pulling in early, so it was a good thing to be up and having breakfast at the crack of dawn. Disembarking from the train, everyone was waiting for their cars and I was searching out my motorcycle. The bike was towed off the train after about 45 minutes. I headed over to the unloading ramp and hopped on the bike while the attendant took off the tie-downs. I jumped on the bike and headed onto the freeway towards D.C. I wanted to ride through Washington, D.C. and past all the sites, the U.S. Capitol, the White House, and the Washington Monument. The traffic and the security made it hard to get close, especially by the White House. However, I was happy to ride through the Capitol and felt a sense of accomplishment. From Maryland to Delaware, across the Chesapeake Bay, and then to Lewis to catch the Cape May ferry across Delaware Bay to New Jersey, that was my plan. The ferry ride was a blast. I've taken ferries before with my car and once on a motorcycle trip in Europe, but never with my own bike. This was a first. Not a huge deal, but cool nonetheless. Less than 2 hours later, I was in New Jersey riding the Jersey Shore, feeling a sense of having arrived, and again battling the crazy heat wave in my motorcycle gear. I had fun on the bike riding around, not so much fun sweating, and then decided to head to the Garden State Parkway in North. A lot of stuff happened today. I was going to sleep well tonight. Tomorrow I would go back to the beginning to visit where I grew up in Brooklyn, and I was sure also to battle the heat wave in the Northeast. From New Jersey, over the Outer Bridge crossing to Staten Island, and then over the Verrazano Bridge to Brooklyn, I was back at the beginning, my beginning. I've been back to Brooklyn a few times over the decades, but that ended in the late 90s when most of my family moved. I was on my motorcycle, on the Belt Parkway, heading to my old neighborhood. big smile was hidden in my helmet. I was excited to see everything that had changed and to trigger the memories and feelings from my youth. I'd moved away from Brooklyn 32 years ago when I was 18 years old. Now returning at the age of 50 on my motorcycle, it was definitely a great way to punctuate, underline, and add an exclamation mark to the story of my life. There was nothing heroic about arriving by motorcycle, but for me, it was a grand adventure and had the effect of energizing my soul. I did a brief motorcycle tour through Brighton Beach, Coney Island, and Sheepshead Bay, finding glimpses of the familiar and encountering the new and unknown. Zooming through traffic on Brighton Beach Avenue, I made my way to Coney Island, the Cyclone, and Nathan's famous hot dogs. I was anxious to walk to the beach in Brighton, but first a slice of pizza at Rocco's. Walking through the park and seeing my apartment building in the distance brought back a lot of great memories, too many to recount, but the place, the people, and that era were special. It was now time to get some sand between my toes. It was magical to be in the ocean on Brighton Beach. I could see Coney Island, the parachute jump, and the Wonder Wheel in the distance. The jetty of rocks marked each bay, and the loads of people sprawled out in the sand. I lost track of the time during the walk. It was a nice feeling to retrace my footsteps from when I was a wild boy on the streets of Brooklyn. I felt joyful and grateful. Grateful for being here this day and grateful for my personal history that started in Brighton Beach in 1968. Accepting my personal history is about embracing all that I have experienced in my life, my strengths and my flaws, and accepting myself for the soul that I am, with respect and gratitude for the life I've lived and will live. I was back at the beginning, and that was propelling me forward on this continuing adventure. My back to the beginning theme was experienced, and now it was time to focus on Atlantic Canada. I was to make my way north, but first I needed a pair of new motorcycle tires. I headed north from New York, leaving Brooklyn, driving through Queens, across the Whitestone Bridge, into the Bronx, and crossing into Connecticut. A couple of hours in Brookfield, Connecticut, getting new tires installed, gave me the time to chill and contemplate the rest of the day. The thought of passing through cities and the beginning of Labor Day weekend traffic by the coast, as well as a heat wave that had 24 hours of steam left, gave me pause. I enlisted the help of the shop for route suggestions. Everyone was super helpful and gave a unanimous simultaneous response: stay away from the coast and continue north toward the Green Mountains of Vermont. I left the shop happy to have new rubber on the road. I was most happy about rolling hills, twisties, and a drop in temperature of 25 degrees compared to yesterday. Heading north on Route 7 immediately paid dividends. Riding through the green of Connecticut and passing towns with no sign of an interstate was simply brilliant. I was having a blast. These were great motorcycle roads, and I was in the flow. I soon found myself riding through the Berkshires of Massachusetts. Mountains, villages, towns, and super fun riding. Crossing the state border into Vermont, I was riding through the Green Mountains National Forest. The temperatures continued to fall and the riding continued to be spectacular, but it was late and had been a long day. Wilmington, Vermont was approaching and seemed like a good choice. Pulling into Wilmington, I selected the first inn I saw. I took a stroll in town, 2 blocks, followed by a nice dinner and a cold IPA. What more could I ask for? Beautiful scenery and riding this afternoon. Before I took off on the bike, I walked across the street to the diner. It was an easy call. Coffee as usual and something that would require Vermont maple syrup. French toast, maple syrup, plenty of coffee, and I was ready to ride. Waking up to a cool 58 degrees was a welcome change from the previous days. The sky was overcast, but I knew it was going to be great riding conditions. I packed up the bike and headed north on Route 100, hugging the Green Mountains National Forest. The roads were all mine. The ride was spirited and at the same time peaceful. Covered bridges, rolling hills, streams, creeks, and the Green Mountains. I turned east and then north, and I was in New Hampshire, on my way to the Kancamagus Highway in the White Mountains National Forest. The Kancamagus Highway was a blast, and I was pushing the bike. I was close to Mount Washington Auto Road and Mount Washington, which is the highest point in the northeastern part of the United States, something like 6,200 feet. I couldn't resist. I would have plenty of time to make it to Portland, Maine and the ferry tomorrow. I could do the Auto Road and stay around there. Mount Washington Auto Road was plugged into the GPS, and I was quite chuffed, as the Brits say. It was 8 miles or so to the summit, but it took a bit of time to get there. Incredibly steep roads, some gravel, and a few hairpins, as well as lots of slow-moving cars. The smell of burning brakes permeated the air. I suspect many cars would need new brake pads, radiator fluid, and a transmission service after doing this trip. At the top, I parked the bike and headed for a walk to take some pictures. I avoided the long line at the summit where everyone was taking their turn. After pausing to take in the beauty and enjoying the expansive views, I jumped on the bike. My excitement on the ride up was only rivaled by the ride down. It was fun spiraling around the mountain roads, stopping briefly for the moose on the road, but then I was on a southerly course in search of lodging. Wildcat Inn and Tavern was an easy decision. There was a small room at the right price. Yes, it was above the kitchen, but I didn't mind. Neil Young was playing on a speaker outside, kids were playing, and people were enjoying beer and wine on the grass. I was in the right place at the right time. Serendipity had visited me again. Finding a table in the tavern, there was live music, and he had an eclectic playlist. From 50s classics to Jackson Browne, Tom Petty, Van Morrison, Neil Diamond, the Eagles, and on. The crowd loved it, sang along, and lots of old-timers got up to dance. It was a great celebration, and the locals were out. I retired for the night, having given in to dessert and another glass of wine, both of which made no sense, but I got caught up and didn't want the night to end. Like all good things, the time to call it a night did arrive. Today was an easy 2-hour ride to catch the ferry in Portland, Maine. The weather was great and I arrived with time to spare. Lining up were cars, motorcycles, and RVs waiting for the cat to arrive. The ferry is a big catamaran and supposedly makes the 5.5-hour crossing quite fast. I spoke with a few other motorcycle riders and exchanged stories of grandeur and adventure. Mostly everyone was very warm and friendly. The call came and motorcycles rode up onto the ship first. They packed us side by side and we had to strap the bikes down with very little clearance between them. I felt the pressure and rushed through it. On the ship, I settled in and changed out of my motorcycle gear. After spending a bit of time talking routes with a few other motorcycle travelers, I needed to feed my belly. I shoveled down a chicken pesto panini, chips, and a chocolate chip cookie. Feeling content or nauseous or both, I settled in for the crossing. There was a Celtic duo serenading the ship, and therefore it was time to sink into my chair, close my eyes, and dream. I was happy that I had a hotel about 5 minutes from the ferry, booked for the night. Tomorrow would be my first day traveling the southern coast of Nova Scotia in the direction of Halifax. What an adventure. Next stop, Atlantic Canada. Arriving went smoother than I expected. The crew had removed the tie-downs on all the motorcycles. Disembarking didn't take too long, and all the cars and motorcycles lined up to go through customs. It was a slow but a smooth process, and my hotel was literally 3 minutes from the port. I was elated and happy to be in Canada. Tomorrow I would be riding the coast in Nova Scotia, and it would mark the start of yet another new adventure. I was elated to be in Nova Scotia and excited to be on the bike for this first day in Canada. I hugged the Atlantic coast and made my way north. I was heading to Lunenburg, a UNESCO town, and planned on a double overnight there. The weather was perfect for riding, and as I made my way closer to the ocean, the salt air filled my helmet. I mainly rode Route 3, which painted a tight line up the south shore of Nova Scotia, heading up from Yarmouth to Halifax. It's called the Lighthouse route, and I was on watch. At one point, I passed by a sign that said site of the 1967 UFO incident in Shag Harbor. I made a U-turn, as did several other cars, and took the compulsory pictures by the sign and the lobster alien. Shelburne was a great stop, and I had lunch at the Sea Dog Saloon on the wharf. A beautiful day and great views. Heading from Shelburne north, the coast became more interesting and the coves were plenty. I stopped at Carter's Beach, where cars were lined up and parked for a mile or so on the road. My next stop was Crescent Beach. Cars were able to drive on the packed sand. I headed down and onto the beach. It was a sunny, windswept day, and it was something special to take the bike on the beach and park within feet of the surf. Here I am at Crescent Beach, about a couple hours south of Halifax. I'm going to Lunenburg tonight. I took some time to soak in the experience. It was a feeling of having arrived. It was a state of mind and possibly a new rhythm to the trip. That was how I felt, and it definitely was a turning point for me this day and on the journey. Not too long after getting back on the road, the GPS took me to a ferry crossing on the way to Lunenburg. Now this was cool. A 5-10 minute crossing for $7 Canadian bought me a bunch of time and a huge smile. Once I arrived in Lunenburg, I set out to find a place to stay for the next 2 nights. It was a quaint town with impressive ships and historic buildings painted in vibrant colors. I strolled the streets and built up a good appetite. I found my way to the Grand Banquet, which was crowded, but I was able to grab a beer and wait for a seat at the bar to open. Dinner was an authentic Arcadian Cajun seafood stew and more beer to wash it down. A couple sat at the bar next to me all through the evening and we chatted it up big time. It was interesting for me as they pulled back the curtain and showed me a bit more of the real Canada. Travel opens the door to connecting with people, dispelling stereotypes and learning about other cultures. Hours of chatting and it was time to head back to the hotel. Today was a day to enjoy the uniqueness of Lunenburg and some time off the bike. I wasn't thinking about getting anywhere or where I needed to be. I was just happy to be here now. I woke up feeling energized and rested. The double overnight in Lunenburg did me good. It was what one would imagine a Nova Scotia morning to be, foggy and wet. The only thing missing was the sound of glaring foghorns. Jeanette was flying into Halifax this evening, and that would mark a new phase of the journey for the next couple of weeks. I was looking forward to sharing the trip with her. I headed toward Halifax and chose the Lighthouse route tracing the shoreline north. I was popping in and out of quaint coves all up the coast. The route was lined with fishing wharfs, moored sailboats, harbor cove towns, small beaches, and the famous Peggy's Cove Lighthouse. On the way to the lighthouse, I passed the site of the Swiss air crash. People were stopping to visit the memorial. There was also the SS Atlantic Memorial remembering the sinking of the ship and loss of over 500 lives in the late 1800s. I arrived at Peggy's Cove. The lighthouse was a spectacle that you could see from the distance. The coastline was rugged and the cove and lighthouse were representative of Nova Scotia so far. It was the picture that makes a postcard, authentic and beautiful. The wind and the waves crashing on the rocks added to the excitement of being there. People were climbing across the large plateau of barrier rocks around the lighthouse to get closer to the sea. Warning signs were posted, but that didn't seem to deter anyone. The sea was relatively calm and the footing was easy. Another feeling of having arrived washed over me. It was more than a sense of accomplishment. It was a feeling of being where you're supposed to be at a given point in time. The sky was dark and the clouds looked a bit ominous, but it hadn't rained yet. Today was overcast and the humidity was high, but the riding was awesome. The weather was simply a Nova Scotia backdrop to a great day of riding. As I approached Halifax, I quickly realized that it was a proper city. Making it to the hotel, I was intent to get settled before Jeanette got in. After checking in and getting to the room, followed by laundry and a shower, it was time for me to get a bite to eat, as she would be in late. It was great to have my partner joining me for a couple of weeks. The plan had been to take the day and explore Halifax by foot. We headed to the Halifax harbor. It was a beautiful morning and we strolled along the water, walking all the way down to Pier 21, which housed Canada's Museum of Immigration. We walked the city and took the time to visit the Maritime Museum. There's a rich history rife with tragedy, from the Titanic to the SS Mont Blanc explosion that killed 2,000 and injured 9,000. We headed to a beer garden on the harbor for guess what? Beer and lunch. Halifax was a very walkable city, at least the downtown. It was a good stop and jumping off point to explore Atlantic Canada. Tomorrow would be 2 up on the bike. The 2 panniers and top case were filled. There were big dry bags strapped to the top of each pannier, and then there was the pillion. We rode up to the Citadel for a great view of Halifax, and it also gave me a chance to get comfortable with the added weight and dynamics of the bike. The planned route took us through Dartmouth and then to the coast where we joined the maritime route, traversing the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. It was a windy day, and the chop on the ocean was revealed in the distance. We popped in and out of small harbor towns and coves and continued to make our way up the coast. I was enjoying the newness of the adventure. It wasn't about finding the next new thing and that new thing having to be better than the last. I was simply glad to be on the journey. Clearly, you don't always have to travel far from home to find those things that are most fulfilling for you. But maybe you have to travel far to realize that sometimes. After a long morning of riding, we stopped for lunch in Sherbrooke before heading north by northeast to the island of Cape Breton. Our goal was to get to Baddock for the evening, which would be the starting point for embarking on the Cabot Trail tomorrow. Dark black clouds dogged us for a few hours, threatening to rain. We made it to Cape Breton Island without getting wet, but the sky was ominous. Arriving in Baddock, we found an inn, settled in, had dinner, and went for a walk. The Cabot Trail and the Cape Breton Highlands were supposed to be iconic, and we were looking forward to a fresh start tomorrow. The Cabot Trail is a big draw to Nova Scotia, especially for motorcyclists. We took the counterclockwise route. This would ensure that we were in the lane closest to the water and the edge of the cliffs. The sun was shining and the temperatures were in the low 50s and steadily climbing. Immediately out of Baddock on the Cabot Trail, the riding took a new turn, so to speak. There was a sense that more of what we were encountering was unique to Nova Scotia. Green mountains and forests as a backdrop to coves, lighthouses, and harbor towns, all bumping up to the ocean. This was Nova Scotia. We stopped around in Green Beach and had the first glimpses of those iconic Canadian maritime cliffs touching the ocean. Not too much further up the trail, we parked by a beach and had our sandwiches. Passing into the Cape Breton Highlands National Park, we continued our way north, and then cutting across the island to the west side, we took a detour off the Cabot Trail. It was a spectacular diversion to St. Margaret Village near Capstick and Askey Bay, to the tip of Cape Breton Island and Cabot Straits on the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I believe it's the most northerly point of Nova Scotia. We were the only people there, the views were epic, the ocean was fierce, the waves were crashing onto the cliffs, and we were smiling. I rode the motorcycle right to the tip of the pier. The water was rushing into the harbor. We paused for a bit and absorbed the incredible goodness of our surroundings. Minutes later, heading back toward the Cabot Trail, I had to resist just turning around again to experience the grandeur one more time. Through the highlands to Pleasant Bay, we made the turn south toward Chetty Camp. This was the part of the Cabot Trail whose pictures make it to many postcards, or nowadays Facebook, Instagram, or a screensaver. The riding was brilliant. The ride on the Cabot Trail today lived up to expectations. We were enjoying the trip and the experience of new places. One of the themes that kept popping up in our conversations had to do with the uniqueness of a place. Was it unique to where we were? Did it define the place? Or could we simply be in any one of a dozen or so other places doing the same thing? The answer varied. There have been certain things that were unique to Atlantic Canada, and more specifically Nova Scotia. The lighthouses, harbor towns and coves, and a brief stretch of the Cabot Trail. There were many other things so far that one could find closer to home. That didn't diminish how much we were enjoying our time, but it did give us an appreciation for being able to have a similar experience closer to home. Chetty Camp was a small area by any standard, but for Nova Scotia and the Cabot Trail it was a destination. We selected a hotel with a superb location, view, and a restaurant. It was right on the Chetty Camp boardwalk and would provide a great sunset view. There was a recurring theme: eating too much, drinking too much, and feeling very full. A bottle of Nova Scotia white wine, mussels, chowder, haddock, some Arcadian fish dish, and 2 desserts later, we stumbled to the chairs outside our room for a view of the sunset and the water.
Together we go down to the ocean for you to sail away. Trying not to show you my emotions, and now you sail away. Together we go down to the ocean for you to sail away. Trying not to show you my emotions, and now you sail away.
We decided to head to Charlottetown. This would give us 3 evenings on Prince Edward Island, with a solid day off the bike and another day to explore the island. The ride south on the Cabot Trail revealed some super roads and views. Through forests, cliffs along the Gulf, and desolate towns we rode. Leaving the Cabot Trail, we were on the Kildare Trail, which took us through areas with deep Scottish and Irish heritage. The ride was serene and enjoyable. Crossing over the Cancel Causeway by Port Hastings, we departed Cape Breton Island. There is the Confederation Bridge, or a ferry that gets you from Nova Scotia to PEI. The route time is basically the same, except the ferry gives you about an hour and a half less time in the saddle. Arriving at the ferry, we were directed to the lane for motorcycles. The ferry was free in this direction, and the crossing would take about an hour and a half. We drove onto the ferry and I tied the bike down. The crossing was smooth and we were pulling into PEI. The call to return to your vehicles was made. Kickstand up, Jeanette on the bike, and we were the first ones off the ship. About 45 minutes later, we were cruising around downtown. We found our hotel and checked in. It was a brisk walk to the restaurant. Afterwards, we walked around Charlottetown a bit. We called it a night and went back to the hotel. It was a great day full of so many experiences. It felt like we lived a lifetime in one day. Today was a much-needed rest day off the road and an opportunity to hang out in Charlottetown for the day. We took a long walk around Charlottetown. It was the perfect day to be out and about. The weather was cool and sunny, and there was a farmer's market on Queen Street. We strolled around for a bit, admiring the history and the activity in Charlottetown on a Sunday. Once we built up an appetite, we stepped into the Con House, a brewery and pub steeped in history. Great food, a beer-tasting flight, and more beer put smiles on our faces. We walked the harbor. Charlottetown is the birthplace of modern-day Canada. There was a fair amount of history there as well. We grabbed a bite to eat in a farm-to-table restaurant. The food was thoughtfully prepared and measured up. There were great indie tunes playing, and the atmosphere in the places we had stopped into were noticeably hip and chill. Waking up today, there was no need to pack up the bike. It was a good feeling to go for a ride without the bike fully loaded. After some coffee and a small bite, we hopped on the motorcycle to ride some of Prince Edward Island. The mandatory stop in Cavendish and Green Gables was the first on the list. Both were made famous by the Anne of Green Gables novel and various TV shows over the years. Probably one of the most famous fictitious characters to come to life. We headed into Prince Edward Island National Park and explored the campgrounds and the beaches. The views were incredible, and it is truly a place to visit when on PEI. The coastline was rugged, and while there were people on the beach, it still had the sense of being untouched and preserved. We rode the coast and ended up in North Rustico. The Blue Mussel Cafe was on everyone's dining list, and there was a reason for it. The place was great. Lunch was a seafood experience that was the best so far in Atlantic Canada. The ingredients were all local. The seafood probably was caught within the last few days, and the preparation was detailed and delicious. Feeling so content from the brief ride and spectacular lunch, we steered in the direction of the hotel. Tomorrow we'd be off to Nova Scotia to catch the overnight ferry to Newfoundland. Each day was filled with so many experiences. I was truly thankful and grateful for the adventure that continued to unfold. Today we would travel through 2 Canadian provinces, take 1 ferry, and board a second ferry to take us overnight to a 3rd Canadian province. There was a 1 p.m. ferry to Nova Scotia, and we arrived at the harbor in plenty of time. The ferry crossing was fine, and we disembarked from the boat in Nova Scotia right into the rain. The remaining part of the day was cold, wet, and filled with highway riding. Once on Cape Brighton Island, we took the southeast side of Broadiour Lake. We pulled into the secure area to line up the bike for boarding. The ferry was a proper ship and different from the others. We had a cabin booked, the ship was relatively new, and almost looked more like a cruise ship than a ferry. They called for boarding. We mounted up and rode in on the lower deck. I strapped down the bike on 4 points. We took our wet and muddy bags off the bike and headed up to our cabin. The ship was pristine and so was the cabin. We took a walk around the ship and explored a little.
Hey Jen, we're on the cruise ship. I think I'm recording. Motorcycles downstairs and we got a cabin. Woo-hoo. Oh, I'm so happy.
Happy to be back in the cabin. I set the alarm for an early wake up to have breakfast before pulling into port. Everything was prepared for the morning and for Newfoundland. It was 6 a.m. Newfoundland time, and we would be disembarking around 7:15. Coffee and eggs, breakfast was done. The adventure continued, and we were riding off into the rain with a full tank of gas, heading to Gros Morne National Park. We were in Newfoundland. It was a great sense of accomplishment, and we were happy that the gear was keeping us dry so far. It was an intense ride from Channel Port aux Basques to Rocky Harbor in Gros Morne National Park. We were riding north on the western side of Newfoundland. It was cold and the rain hitting us felt like pellets. The potholes were something to watch for, as well as for moose. There are pockets of incredible natural beauty that I was sure typified the Newfoundland experience, but alas, in the rain and fog, we only caught a few glimpses. As we got closer to our destination, we also became wetter and colder. The gear had limits and the conditions were bad. After approximately 3.5 hours riding in the rain, we arrived at the hotel. Success. The room was ready, and Jeanette was in poor shape from being in the elements for too long. I unloaded all our mud and rain-soaked bags and brought it into the hotel. The panniers were full of water, but I had all our stuff in dry bags. We walked to Sunset Cafe in the misty wet air of a Newfoundland day. As the storm cleared in Rocky Harbor, we found a much-needed wonderful meal. Big smiles on our tired-worn faces, but a feeling of immense gratitude for being safe, happy, dry, and sitting down to some really great food. Following lunch, we strolled around the harbor for a short time. It was a beautiful place. The pub was selling tickets for an Irish band and show, a kitchen party. This is typical to Newfoundland, and the hotel had their version for the guests. The best analogy is a house party in the States, but here the entertainment are the attendees, their instruments, and their wits. We went to the show and it was an authentic experience. We learned a lot about Canadian culture and history through the music and the band's storytelling. There were people in the audience from almost every Canadian province, and it was nice to see how music can bring everyone together. There were a lot of travelers in the crowd that we met and talked with. The people working at the pub where the band was performing were joyful. Their enthusiasm and love of the music was clear as they sang every word and danced to every beat. It was a wonderful evening, and we had a glimpse into another place and culture. We took our time taking a few pullouts and side roads down to the water for what was the beginning of a day full of epic views. Newfoundland was delivering, and we were happy to be there. Sun is shining, the weather is sweet, make you want to move your dancing feet. Bob Marley had it right. The weather was spectacular, and we were heading to the Western Brook Pond boat tour in Gros Morne National Park. We were on the bike heading north from Rocky Harbor on the Trans-Canadian Highway, traversing the western side of Newfoundland. It would be a brief ride to the trailhead for the walk to the boat tour. We arrived at the Western Brook trailhead in our gear. It was a 35-minute hike on flat gravel terrain to the boat dock. The weather was cool, the wind was blowing, the sun was shining. There were practically no clouds, and the view of the Western Brook Fjord in the distance was pulling us down the trail. Arriving at the dock, a fair number of people were lined up already for the 12:30 p.m. boat. There were some familiar faces in the crowd from last night as well. Leaving the dock, the excitement grew. I had envisioned this place and this moment for a long time. The boat made its way toward the entrance of the fjord. The massive cliffs bordered both sides. We were taken deeper and deeper in. Everyone was excited to be there, and we enjoyed learning about where they were from, their travels, and sharing our stories. Most were Canadians from other provinces. The spray of the water, the sun on my face, the wind in my hair, and the splendor of all that was before us was intoxicating. As we moved further into the fjords, the features and waterfalls presented themselves, from the Tin Man in the cliff to the old man sleeping on the ridge. This was one of those places that was simply a picture painted by the universe. The boat turned once we made it to the end of the pond, and we started the journey back to the dock. A flurry of songs played in rapid succession. The Newfoundland music was cheerful, and you wanted to dance, hoot, and holler. Spirits were high, and it was a zen vibe. Leaving the boat, I continued to feel waves of gratitude and joy for this day's experience, especially being able to share it with Jeanette. Back on the bike and twisting that throttle in Newfoundland on this incredible day, all was good. It was late and we had a full day. I wanted to ride some more, but instead we headed back to the hotel. The hotel restaurant had a view of the bay, and sunset was going to prove to be magical. Dinner and wine followed by a gradient of colors on the horizon as the sun disappeared. It was a special day. It was as if the last 2 days of tough riding were building up to these moments as a reward for traveling such a long way. We were heading east. The plan was to stop about halfway between Gros Morne National Park, Rocky Harbor, and St. John's. The halfway point we were targeting was Gander. We woke up to a beautiful but chilly morning. We took our time and had a nice breakfast before getting ready and packing up the bike. I was excited to be heading in the direction of St. John's. After stopping at Norris Point for some pictures and to gas up, it was decided that we'd head straight to Gander. It was about 40 miles until exiting Gros Morne National Park. These were the views we missed on the way in during the rain. The ride was relaxing, the views were filled with green, rugged mountains and lakes, and the weather was brisk. There was a special story that we learned about Gander. A couple of days ago, it had been the 17th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attack on the USA. Gander's airport was the closest landing opportunity between flights from Europe and North America. On September 11, 2001, during the 9/11 terrorist attack, all air traffic into the U.S. was diverted and shut down. About 38 planes and upwards of almost 7,000 passengers landed in Gander that day, which practically doubled the population. The story was made into a musical on Broadway called Come From Away. The real story of how the town took in 7,000 passengers is an amazing account of humanity and compassion. We were looking forward to spending the night there. I didn't know what we would experience, but just the act of being there would surely be something. Arriving in Gander was uneventful. How do you describe Gander, given the incredible story around 9/11? This in-between place or waypoint for people on the way to and from St. John's was the center of a miraculous story. The acts of kindness from the people here in the face of a horrific tragedy is the stuff that brings hope to the world. It definitely affirms the fact that you can't judge a book by its cover. We pass by people and places so many times during the day and don't give a second thought to what is remarkable about them or about a place. Back on the Transcendental Highway, we were on our way to St. John's. It was mainly fast highway driving. I didn't bargain for the amount of highway riding on this trip. There had been way too much of it. Simply, there was absolutely no other choice. Too much riding to get to interesting places was something I would have preferred to avoid. About an hour and a half from St. John's, the dark clouds closed in, the temperature dropped, and the wind gusts were significant. Grappling with the wind for hours, the cold took its toll on both of us. We stopped a couple of times and continued to add layers. Arriving in St. John's, we were both fatigued from the ride. We knew tomorrow would be Jeanette's last day in Newfoundland and the weather would be rainy. I wanted to go to Cape Spear and Signal Hill. It would add less than an hour with stopping, and we had come so far, so we decided to go. Traveling by motorcycle and at times suffering certain conditions is the price to pay for the reward of arriving at an incredible location. Riding up to Cape Spear, the most eastern point in North America with the oldest Newfoundland lighthouse, the view was remarkable and that was the reward. I was ecstatic to be there and I wanted to take the time to experience Cape Spear. Jeanette was spent, and it was understandable. She had been on the bike 9 out of the last 12 days for about 1,600 miles in all kinds of weather conditions. This was an opportunity to reap the rewards that come with arriving at a destination after traveling a difficult path. Let me just say, though, that the wind at Cape Spear was crazy. The views of the Atlantic, the cliffs along the coast, and the entire historic site were iconic, and a real photographer would be able to do it justice. But nothing could rival being there. It's a remarkable feeling to have been to the most easterly point in North America, so far north from home. I really had the feeling like I had done something. Heading in the direction of our bed and breakfast, we passed through St. John's for a quick detour at Signal Hill. There's a lot of history there. But the first wireless transatlantic message being received by Marconi in 1901 is the coolest in my book. The views from the top of Signal Hill were epic as well. In the distance you could see Cape Spear. All of St. John was sitting below. Jeanette's riding on this adventure was done. 2 nights here and she'd be off to Florida by plane, and I'd be solo traveling again. There was a great feeling of having arrived for both of us. It was a feeling of accomplishment and a sense of appreciation for the journey we experienced together. Riding through the streets of St. John's and up another hill, we arrived at a nondescript house that was typical for the area and quite nice. It was a beautiful house and room. We valued being somewhere that had a feeling of home, even if it wasn't ours. We headed out to explore and grab a bite to eat, albeit on foot this time. St. John's has character. The streets and homes, the colors of the houses, the harbor and the bars, all remind you that you were in St. John's. Off to the Yellow Belly Brewery for more than a pint and some pub food. The music was hip and cool. It was Saturday night and we really were enjoying ourselves. The allure of George Street and the pubs weren't strong enough to overcome our feeling of being done for the evening. We were spent. Sometimes you just have to know when to call it a night. That part gets easier at our age. Our last day in St. John's, Newfoundland, and our last day on this journey together. The bed and breakfast was spectacular, and we slept well. We grabbed a taxi to Quidi Vidi Village, about a 5-minute ride outside of St. John's. It's a small Newfoundland harbor fishing village with cliffs surrounding a cove. We took a tour of the Quidi Vidi Brewery and followed it up with a tasting. Interesting history and great beer. One of their beers actually uses pure iceberg water. It was noon and we managed to wash down our wonderful breakfast and coffee with plenty of beer. It was brilliant and fun, and so a half pint more, please. By 12:30 p.m. it was time for a walk around the village and some pictures. There's a well-known restaurant and inn, Mallard Cottage. We managed to grab a table and have a super filling lunch. After exploring Quidi Vidi a bit more, we took a taxi back to the B&B. It was our last night here. We reflected on our time together during the trip and how much we enjoyed the adventure. Jeanette was heading home and had a 6:30 a.m. flight tomorrow. In the morning, I'd be heading to the overnight ferry back to Nova Scotia. I was going to start my long way down version traveling back to Florida. It was 5 a.m. and Jeanette's taxi to the airport arrived. We said our goodbyes. We were both heading home, although I was taking the longer way. It was a rainy and windy day in St. John's. After a bit more sleep and some breakfast, I eventually packed up the bike, paid the bill at the B&B, and geared up. My rain gear was on and I decided to go directly to the ferry. I arrived at the ferry several hours before they would board the vehicles. The ferry would take 17 and a half hours, but I was happy to have a base of operation and settle in for the crossing. Today marked a transition on this journey. I was turning toward home and heading in that general direction. I had traveled 3,200 miles and was looking forward to being back in the USA. Back to solo traveling, which opens things up to a greater range of possibilities and allows serendipity to play a bigger role on the journey.
In a few minutes, a video regarding your safety and security will be shown on several of the televisions throughout the vessel, as well as inside the cabins.
Traveling solo allows the quiet noisiness of my own thoughts to work their magic. It's a meditative experience that I talked about on my prior journey. Solo travel opens my mind to a greater field of possibilities, and it allows for sparks of inspiration. It's like catching lightning in a bottle, where those sparks find their way into my consciousness. I was looking forward to the coming days, and I was grateful for the continuing adventure. The ferry arrived on time in North Sydney, Nova Scotia. I was getting fatigued by the bad weather in Atlantic Canada and decided to fast forward 393 miles to New Brunswick. I was about an hour and a half from the USA and was looking forward to being back in the States tomorrow. Moving in the direction of home felt good. It was a cold, dreary day, but I was less than 2 hours from the USA and was looking forward to crossing the border. My goal was to hug Fundy Bay and make my way to Shenandoah National Park in Maine.
Hold on, wait up just a minute now.
After crossing the border, I rode east, then south. The weather sucked, and so did the visibility. What added to the frustration was a significant amount of road construction. Mud, gravel, and lane closures funneling two-way traffic into a single lane. That was the entire morning. About an hour and a half from Arcadia, and conditions continued to deteriorate. Heading inland revealed some interesting roads and breaks in the rain, but it was again short-lived. Traffic and the weather were not cooperating. I reviewed weather reports for the coming day for my potential routes. Bad weather would be dogging me no matter where I would go. I felt like I was bailing on too many things that I wanted to do, but I was also listening to my gut. I was into the fourth week of the trip, and I had accomplished what I set out to do, which was Atlantic Canada and getting to Newfoundland. Now my goal was simple. I wanted to get home and sprinkle in some fun riding. I would head to Front Royal, Virginia and Skyline Drive. I was about 550 miles from Front Royal, Virginia, which put me in striking distance of Skyline Drive and some great riding. That would be followed by the weekend on the Blue Ridge Parkway through North Carolina. Tomorrow would mainly be the interstate and traffic. I didn't take a single picture today, and I didn't even want to write about the day. My goal was to get to Front Royal, Virginia and the start of Skyline Drive. Bad roads, dangerous drivers, and tons of traffic had me counting my blessings that I was still standing. I was on the road for about 11 hours and didn't stop for lunch. I would estimate that of that time, at least 3 hours were stop-and-go traffic.
Hold on, wait a second, don't you know that you're always on my mind all the time.
Let me start out by saying today was an awesome day full of great riding and amazing mountain landscapes. I was on Skyline Drive, and there were the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. The mountains and the road were engulfed in fog and mist, with pockets of sunshine. It was funny that it took me about 25 days to get back here, close to where I got off the auto train. There were plenty of overlooks and beautiful, expansive mountain goodness in all directions. Riding today reinforced the kind of motorcycle travel I enjoy, traveling slowly and experiencing great epic views. Here in the Blue Ridge Mountains, there was a concentration of great riding and views, with plenty of interesting roads in addition to Skyline Drive and the Blue Ridge Parkway. Does a travel adventure, or any trip for that matter, need to be far and away? Is it a never-ending attempt to one-up the last experience? No and no, of course not. Each experience stands on its own. Atlantic Canada and Newfoundland was something I wanted to do, and I did it. Today marked the phase of the trip which was about both exploring the familiar and discovering new stuff. I completed the entire Skyline Drive and decided to head to Waynesboro a few miles away. It's a small historic town in Main Street with a spectacular backdrop of mountains in the distance. The town is a gateway for hikers and vacationers heading out on the Appalachian Trail or just simply exploring Shenandoah National Park. Waynesboro, Virginia sits at the entrance to both Skyline Drive and the Blue Ridge Parkway. It was a serendipitous find. The benefits of not planning were paying off again. Up early and on the road, heading to the Blue Ridge Parkway. Waynesboro, Virginia is the northernmost entrance of the parkway. The Blue Ridge through Virginia was magical, and it was clear and a cool day. The vents on my motorcycle jacket were open, albeit there was a bit of a chill at higher elevations, but it was great weather. The views and undulating road kept coming.
Without a warning, walking the same steps every morning. I see all the same faces, but I don't even know them. I wanna change now, following the same trace. I'm stuck in a strange place, and I need a change now.
I jumped off the parkway briefly in Floyd, Virginia to grab lunch. I noticed a sign for the Crooked Music Road. The trail through the mountains was a regular route for country music stars over the decades. They'd go from mountain town to play, hence the name. The motorcycle culture in this part of the world is definitely friendlier than the last couple of weeks. Riding spirited down the road, I came to an abrupt stop. There was a huge tree that must have just come down and was blocking both lanes of the parkway. A nice group of people, both men and women riders. They offered to hold the branches while I passed by with my bike, which I happily took them up on. I was happy to have traveled fast through the weather of the Northeast. The traffic and challenges of the last several days had paid off. I was happy to be back in North Carolina, in the mountains. I arrived in Blowing Rock, North Carolina, a quaint mountain town, and quickly found an inn. It was a peaceful place, and I had been there on the 50 of 50 journey, which made it nice to return to on this trip. I strolled a couple of blocks into town and sat down at the Speckled Trout for a couple of IPAs and a trout dinner. I enjoyed the meal and the moonrise. It was a beautiful evening. A foggy morning in Blowing Rock, and I was up early, ready to head south to Waynesville. After a short walk into town for breakfast, I returned to the inn to get ready. Waynesville is a small town south of Asheville. I was making an effort to explore small towns in the hopes of discovering something new. These small towns have a personality, good food, great beer, and there's usually a place or two that attracts not just locals, but folks from neighboring towns. Before jumping on the Blue Ridge Parkway south from Blowing Rock, I followed 221, a very twisty and fun road to ride. The fog of the morning added to the excitement of the road. Back on the Blue Ridge Parkway, I spent the rest of the day meandering south. Traveling south on the parkway, the elevation increased and the broad views of the mountain landscape kept coming from every direction. The Blue Ridge Parkway is a unique travel experience. The Parkway is a ribbon through the Blue Ridge Mountains with views that don't quit. Riding today left me with a warm feeling, seeing all the people appreciating and enjoying such grand natural beauty. There were people hiking, others riding the Parkway and stopping at overlooks, but all with smiles on their faces. Respect and appreciation for the world around us. It was a beautiful thing. People traveling here represented all walks of life and all ages. There was a friendliness and a warm-heartedness I found in my encounters. Add to that the incredible concentration of great motorcycle riding, and it was a recipe for joy. Waynesville tonight was another small town surprise. Like many of these towns, you could blow right through Main Street without taking notice of what it had to offer. I think sometimes when I'm on the road, in my haste to keep moving or to find a gas station, my focus is very narrow. It's so important to stop, park, and walk around town. In this case, I took a room at a local inn and headed down Main Street. Today I completed riding the entire Blue Ridge Parkway on this trip, starting on Skyline Drive in Front Royal, Virginia, and picking up the Blue Ridge Parkway in Waynesboro, Virginia, all the way to Cherokee, North Carolina. It was a wonderful ride with great views, forests, elevation changes, and small towns along the way. A great finale to exploring Atlantic Canada, Newfoundland, and something familiar as well. Riding Western North Carolina reinforced my love of the area and the fact that you don't have to travel far and wide to be a traveler. The mountains of North Carolina offer a concentration of beauty, super motorcycle riding, forest trails, and mountain towns. Lunch in Bryson City, south of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park and the southern end of the Blue Ridge Parkway. From Bryson City, I headed toward Fontana, taking the Moonshiner 28, a curvaceous road of good twisties and incredible views of Fontana Lake, just near Fontana Dam. I grabbed a room at Fontana Village and then headed to ride the Tail of the Dragon. To 129, hopping into Tennessee at Deals Gap, the end of the Dragon, and then back to Fontana Village for the night. 318 curves and 11 miles is the sales pitch. Classic North Carolina moto roads, the Moonshiner 28 and Tail of the Dragon. I had done the ride many times, but this was the first with this motorcycle, so I got it in my head that it would be a cool thing to do. Each day had been filled with so much splendor and so many new experiences. There was a saturation of newness that challenged me to hold on to all those special moments. The pictures, video, and journal helped with all of that. I was proud of what I had accomplished and experienced this year on these journeys. It really had been an endeavor of the soul. I felt a tremendous sense of accomplishment, a feeling of a life well lived, a sense that I was on the right track, and most definitely, an overwhelming feeling of gratitude for being here now. was time to go home, about 800 miles and 12 hours of riding. I had done it in a single day, coming up and returning on previous trips. This trip I would take a couple of days. They would still be big riding days, but it would give me more time to reflect on the journey and begin that transition from road life to home life. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present more rain. As expected, it was raining hard this morning. The fog permeated the mountain range, and there did not seem to be any signs of it clearing up soon. Several hours of the ride today were on a trajectory that put me on a course to pass through Atlantic. My goal was to get to where I was going as fast as possible. My rain gear was on and the temperature was climbing. Fast forward through lots of I-75 South riding in the heat. These are the routes where motorcycle communication systems and good playlists really make all the difference. I was finally back in Florida and approaching Lake City. I was within 5 hours and 340 miles of home, but it was enough riding for the day. It was after 6 p.m. and there was no reason to get home in a straight shot. Today was the last day of riding and it was all about I-75 South and the Florida Turnpike to get home. Lots of riding in 94-degree heat and Florida sun. I was very excited to be going home and hoped to use my time on the road to reflect on the journey. The adulation of arriving and the accomplishment of the journey was something I wanted my attention to be drawn to. The heat was fatiguing as would be expected. The other thing, for those not familiar with Florida and riding through the middle of the state, were the love bugs. There was no love for me from them. I allowed the heat, the infestation of the bugs, and an oil leak to briefly hijack my attention from what was right in front of me, an incredible journey. It was day 31 on the road. I had ridden over 6,000 miles from Florida to Newfoundland and back. I traveled through 2 countries. I had the bike on the auto train. I took 7 ferries, 2 of which were overnight. I went through 4 Canadian provinces and about 14 US states. Lots of roads were traveled through cities, towns, villages, and a wide array of landscapes. I connected with many interesting people and their cool stories. A full range of weather, road conditions, and accompanying emotions were experienced. It was a rich, wonderful experience. I was home and I was grateful to be here in one piece, having experienced something amazing. The journey, the opportunity to go was all a great privilege. My mind was somewhere between being on the road and being home. It was going to take some time to figure it all out, to decompress, to adjust, and to transition. My memories of the trip are the sparks that ignite that fuel to keep me moving forward. Dreams and memories are the inspiration. There is no doubt that this journey had shaped me in new ways. Even if it feels like a dream, I was still renewed and traveling in new directions. Each day on the journey, there were countless moments, experiences, feelings, thoughts, and ideas. It's impossible to recall, recount, or chronicle each day. I've done what I could do without having to get in the way of experiencing the moment. Be here now. To be in the moment and also to document in some ways requires a balance. Each day is rebirth, a new beginning, born anew with a faint recollection of yesterday, but with the knowledge that I am something more than this day. Somehow you greet the day with all the excitement of what lies in front of you, but with the knowledge that you can't hold on to all the experiences of that day for too long. The transient nature of the day, of your existence, and all the experiences are just the nature of how things work. Everything is impermanent, and yet even with that knowledge, there's a reason to make the most of it and all the experiences that are undoubtedly fleeting. Who knows what was before when I was born on this day, and what will be after this day when it's gone. But I sure hope for another day, and the opportunity to ride on. Immersive travel, living in the moment, moving from one experience to another. Now isn't that heaven, and aren't I blessed to have a glimpse of it here and now? 2 great journeys were completed this year. Almost 18,000 miles were ridden. I've had the feeling of having arrived, and yet there's always the need to keep going, traveling, exploring, and evolving. The journey is more than the traveling through time and space. It's more than going places. It's an endeavor of the soul, whether I'm physically on the road or metaphysically. Where the one journey takes me next, well, that's something I'll have to contemplate and let happen. The one ongoing journey continues. Kerouac talked about what it was like on the road, and it clearly is a metaphor for life. Nothing behind me, everything ahead of me, as is ever so on the road. I set out on both of these journeys for a range of reasons. I love travel, wanted to ride my motorcycle, and was hungry to connect with people, places, and my higher self. I wanted to immerse myself in a new experience, to transcend perceived limits, and to travel. I wanted to punctuate my life with something interesting. My expectation, though, was that I'd be able to bring more of who I am on the road to who I am when I'm off the road, where I'm fully in the moment and feel that I've risen above the noise of everyday stuff. On the road, I'm not sweating the small stuff. Gratitude and positivity are my co-pilots when I'm on the road. Am I a newfound man? I believe I am, but it's not about arriving at a point of completion. Whether it's who I've become as a result of these journeys, or whether it's aspirational and an ongoing process, it's inconsequential. The work is not done, the destination is not reached, the journey continues. It's that same realization. I've had the feeling of having arrived, and yet there's the need to keep going, traveling, exploring, and evolving. It's a sense of being exactly where you should be, and yet you travel on, you explore more. It's an ongoing process of self-discovery and growth, arriving at some point, having some realization, catching a glimpse of grace, and yet there's more to the journey. The arriving is not the conclusion, and it's not enlightenment as a final state of attainment and achievement. It's just one more step on my itinerary of becoming a more warm-hearted human being filled with compassion, grace, and hope.